We're trying to figure out what better explains reality, theism or atheism. And one of the hardest questions to answer from the very beginning of time has been, if there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing? Why does anything exist, in other words? And I think when we look around the universe, we have to figure out certain effects, and these effects must have some kind of cause. In fact, that's how we know God exists. We reason from effect to cause. And there's a number of effects I want to go through here tonight. The first is creation. We'll talk about that first. Secondly is reason, the idea that we can reason to true beliefs. Thirdly is the information found in DNA. Number 4 is morality, objective morality. Dr. Shermer will agree that certain things are objectively right and other things are objectively wrong. Also, evil. Why is there evil in the world if there is a good God? I'm going to argue that evil actually shows God does exist rather than not. And then finally, science. Why can we do science? Why is the world so orderly so we can actually do science? It appears to be the product of a rational mind. And if you notice, each one of these effects that we're trying to discover the cause for is in an acronym, as I'll get to in a minute. We're trying to figure out the cause. I have to figure out what the cause is, and so does Dr. Shermer. Now, Dr. Shermer may not have the same one cause. He may have several causes, but these are effects that require a cause. And this is in an acronym known as CRIMES, C-R-I-M-E-S, and we're going to just go through this as quickly as we can here in this 20 minutes. The first is the idea that there really was, and all scientists seem to agree with this, there really was at one point a big... I'd like to keep the audience awake in the beginning, all right? There was a big bang, as even atheists admit. Stephen Hawking, who, as you know, died earlier this year, said, almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tries to come up with another explanation other than God. I think he fails, but he's admitting the data. What's the data? That space-time and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing. Non-being, not a quantum vacuum, but nothing. Another colleague of his, Alexander Vilenkin, put it this way. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, and by the way, a cosmologist is not somebody that puts on your makeup, all right? Cosmologist is somebody who investigates the origin of the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of the past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, Vilenkin is a believer in the multiverse. Have you heard of the multiverse? There are other universes out there, and ours just happens to be the one that looks designed, even though there's no way to verify this. But even Vilenkin admits that even if there are other universes out there, the whole show needs an absolute beginning. In addition to the universe exploding into being out of nothing, it did so with extreme precision. Stephen Hawking again put it this way: if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million, a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed back on itself or never developed galaxies. You change the expansion rate, that infinitesimal amount, none of us are here. You can't make any evolutionary argument for this. Why? Because this is the initial condition of the universe. The universe started this way. Also, the gravitational force is fine-tuned to 1 part in 10 to the 40th power. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I. Let me just give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. That's a long way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity's not measured in inches, but this is just give you a scale idea in your mind. If the strength of gravity was different by 1 inch in either direction, across the scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here. Now, I don't have enough faith to believe that that value just happened by chance. Somebody put that value right there. Now, when you add up these 2 arguments, there's really 2 arguments here, the cosmological argument and the fine-tuning argument, you're left with 2 options. Here are the 2 options. If the universe had a beginning, we've got 2 options. Either no one created something out of nothing in a fine-tuned way, or someone created something out of nothing in a fine-tuned way. Now, which view is more reasonable? This is the interactive portion of the program. I think number 2 is more reasonable. By the way, both of these are miracles. It's a miracle to have something come from nothing without a miracle worker. It's also a miracle to have something come from nothing with a miracle worker. The only question is, which view is more reasonable? Now, ladies and gentlemen, if space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing, as even many atheists are now admitting, then whatever created space, matter, and time can't be made of space, matter, and time. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, well, we'll get to that in a minute, personal, and intelligent. Now, when you think of a being with those qualities, who do you think of? That's what we mean by God. Now, the next argument has to do with reason. Now, Dr. Shermer, in his dialogue with Deepak Chopra, admitted that he's a materialist. Michael said, I explained that I'm a materialist and a monist. I do not believe that there is a body and a soul. There is just a body. There is no brain and mind, just brain. So Michael is buying into what we call materialism. And in effect, materialism says that every thought you have is the result of the laws of physics. There's not really a mind there. You're just a brain. You're nothing but a moist robot. And so I think that there's a problem with this, because if Dr. Shermer says my thoughts are determined completely by the non-rational laws of physics, I want to ask him, then so is that thought and all your thoughts about atheism, so why should we believe any of them? If every thought is driven by the laws of physics, we don't really know if we have truth or not. In fact, the problem here is that if atheism were true, we couldn't even be able to reason. Because if we're just moist robots, we're not reasoning, we're just reacting. And a former evolutionist, or a gentleman who was an evolutionist and realized the problem with his worldview, Haldane, put it this way. He said this: if my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true, and hence I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms. He got it. You know, even Darwin recognized this was a problem with his view for another reason. In fact, it's called Darwin's doubt. Here's what Darwin said. He said, with me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of a man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind? Now, reason makes no sense on atheism, materialism, but it makes sense on theism. Why? Because our minds are made in the image of the great mind, and the laws of logic which allow us to think and communicate are based on his nature. The third effect that we need to explain is information, particularly the information found in DNA. And the best way of explaining this is to take you to your breakfast table. Suppose you're a teenager, you come downstairs one morning, and you want to have a bowl of alphabet cereal. And you see the alphabet cereal's knocked over on the table, and right in the middle of the table, the letters spell, take out the garbage, Mom. What are you going to assume? The cat knocked the box over? Earthquake shook the house? No, you're going to say that that's intelligent design from an intelligent being, Mom. Or if you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, John loves Mary, right down here in Santa Cruz, what are you going to say? The waves did that? Crabs came out of the water and made that message? No, you're going to say that had to be the product of a mind, because you know in all your prior experiences that messages only come from minds. They don't come from blind natural laws. Well, if take out the garbage, Mom requires a message, what about the message in every single cell of your body? In fact, every one of your 40 or so trillion cells has a message 3.2 billion letters long. Every letter is in the right order. How did that happen? Where did messages and codes come from? In fact, what we're saying here is DNA is a message. It's like take out the garbage, Mom, but a lot longer. And even Bill Gates admits this. He says that DNA is a software program. Gates said human DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created. I don't know about you, where I come from, you guys come from Silicon Valley, don't you? Whenever there's a program, there's got to be a programmer. Now, Michael might say this is God of the gaps reasoning. This is not God of the gaps reasoning. Why? Because we're not arguing from what we don't know. It's not like we just haven't found a natural law to explain this yet. It's that take out the garbage, Mom is actually evidence for an intelligent being. When you see take out the garbage, Mom on your table, you don't go, well, gee, I just can't find a natural law for this. You go, that's positive evidence for Mom. So we're not arguing from what we don't know. It's not a gap. We're arguing from what we do know. The fourth effect we need to account for is morality. In fact, evil as well. We're going to do these two together. And Michael will agree there is objective morality. Here's the problem from an atheistic standpoint. How can you discover Who is morally better, Mother Teresa or Hitler, if there is no standard beyond humanity? In fact, how can you discover which one of these is better? Well, what you need to do is you need to see a standard or know a standard. In fact, how do you know which map of Scotland is better here? Is it map A or map B? What would you need to see in order to know? You need to see a real unchanging place called Scotland. Because if Scotland doesn't exist, then these two maps are meaningless. But if Scotland does exist, then we can see that map A, while it's not perfect, is a better representation of the real map than is map B. In other words, there's an external referent to which we can measure both maps. That standard is what we can do to figure out which map is closer to the truth. Well, that's exactly what we do when we compare Mother Teresa and Hitler. Mother Teresa wasn't the standard. Hitler wasn't the standard. There's a standard beyond both of them by which we measure both of them, and that standard is God's nature. I don't see how you can come up with a standard external to human beings unless God exists. Now, not long ago, I was at a church in South Dakota in February. I don't know why I went there in February, but I did. Anyway, we were doing our I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist presentation over several nights. The second night I was there, we had the microphone set up, and a couple of young men in their 20s got up to the microphone, and they were atheists. I didn't think anything of it, because if you call something I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, everyone's going to show up. However, the next night I was there, about a 50-year-old man got up to the microphone, and he had a question written on 2 sheets of paper, and he began to read it. About 10 seconds into into reading the question, he just broke down crying. He couldn't go any further. So I walked off the platform, I went down to him, and he handed me these 2 sheets of paper. And all he said was, "Read it, read it." So I'm trying to digest this 2-page question as I'm walking back up to the platform. By the time I got back up to the platform, I realized that that man was upset for 2 reasons. Reason number 1, that man, whose name turned out to be Steve, had just discovered recently that a supposed friend of his, a man by the name of Tom, about a 50-year-old man, had been sexually abusing Steve's daughter from the time she was age 4 to the time she was age 14. Right in his own home, under his nose, never saw it. The second reason Steve was upset was because the 2 men who were there the night before were his sons, who used to be Christians and are now atheists. They said, there can't be a good God, because he wouldn't have allowed this to happen to our sister. There is no God. So I said to him, Steve, it's okay to be mad at God. Some of the Bible writers are mad at God. Read Habakkuk, read the Psalms, some of the Psalms, read Lamentations. God, where are you? God can take it. He's an infinite being. But I hope at some point your sons are going to realize this is not a good argument against God. In fact, it's actually an argument for God. Why? In fact, here's what I said to him. I said, when the time is right, Steve, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, what that 50-year-old man did to your sister isn't really wrong. It's just your opinion. Why? Because if there's no standard beyond humanity, it's just his opinion against yours. By the way, the man who did this is still walking the streets. Why? Everyone knows he did it, but he's not in jail. Because every time the trial comes up, Jessica, the one who was abused, psychologically checks out. She can't testify against him. She wanted to marry him. So I said, Steve, when the right time comes, I want you to say this to your sons. If there is no God, then the man who did this to your sister will never get justice. He's not going to get justice here on earth if she doesn't testify, and he's not going to get justice in the afterlife because according to atheism, there is no afterlife. Do you really think that's the way the universe is? Do you really think there's no such thing as justice? The very reason you're upset, rightfully so, is because you know a great injustice has been done. But there can't be justice, or I should say there can't be injustice unless there's justice. In fact, C.S. Lewis put it best. He said evil requires good and good requires God. He says, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? In fact, it's been also put this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil, but you can't have evil without good. Now, if something's evil out there, and Michael will agree there are many things that are evil, then there must be something good. What is that good? That good is God's nature. If there is no God, then there's nothing ultimately good or bad. There are just molecules bumping into one another. Now, Jessica, the girl that was abused, decided to do something positive with this awful experience. She actually wrote a book. Here it is, Not Your Princess by Jessica Mitchell. I read one chapter of this book and couldn't read it anymore. Why am I telling you this? Because her father, Steve, wants many people as possible to know this. Because this happens too often in American homes. Now, ladies and gentlemen, is the sexual abuse of children evil? Yes. Then God exists. I know that sounds counterintuitive because Michael's going to ask, well, why would he allow it to happen? That's a whole other conversation. But the point is, you can't say God doesn't exist because it wouldn't be evil unless he did exist. Because he's the standard of good by which we'd even know what evil was. He is the standard of measurement. Finally, science. Why is the world so orderly? Why can we do science? Michael Shermer's a scientist. He teaches a class on this. Why can we do science? Why is the world so orderly? In fact, you might ask yourself the question, science requires nature to be goal-directed. Why is nature that way? For example, why do the planets reliably go around the sun? Why don't they go in herky-jerky movements or random movements? You say, Frank, because there's a law like gravity. I know, but why is there a law like gravity? And why is it so precise and consistent? It appears to be the product of a mind, not randomness. In order to do science, you need consistent natural laws that can be relied upon, fine-tuned natural laws. Where do these laws come from? And by the way, these laws affect living and non-living things. In fact, take an oak tree, for example. Where does an oak tree come from? Well, an oak tree comes from an acorn. Well, how come when an acorn is properly nourished, it always becomes an oak tree? It doesn't become an elm tree or a birch tree or a seahorse, right? It always becomes an oak tree. Why is that? Well, because it's programmed to become an oak tree. Yeah, but who programmed it? I mean, is an acorn in the ground conscious going, all right, what do I need to do to become an oak tree? No. It doesn't even have a mind, yet it goes reliably in a direction. If it doesn't have its own mind to go in a direction, there must be an external mind directing it toward an end. That is what Aristotle called the unmoved mover. Thomas Aquinas came along in 1200 AD and said, that's going to be my fifth way to argue for God. Even if the universe didn't have a beginning, it needs someone to keep everything in motion, an external intellect. That's what we mean by God. We wouldn't even be able to do science unless this existed, unless this orderly natural world existed. In fact, Sir Fred Hoyle, who was an atheist, after looking at arguments like this, I don't think he ever became a theist or Christian, don't get me wrong, but he looked at the fine-tuning and some of these other arguments, and here's what he said. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. Now, what do we do with all of these effects? Creation, reason, information, morality, evil, and science. What do they tell us? Well, I think when you break these down, you get the attributes of what we call God. From creation, we know that the cause is immaterial, timeless, and spaceless. He's also extremely powerful to create out of nothing. From reason, we know this being is rational. From information, we know he's extremely intelligent and has purpose. From morality, we know he's absolutely morally perfect and also personal, because you only have a moral obligation to persons. You don't have a moral obligation to impersonal forces. If you go try and dunk a basketball, you're not sinning against the law of gravity. We also know that this being from science creates and sustains orderly natural laws. Now, who fits this? It seems to me that this is a theistic God identified without reference to any religious book. We're just looking at effects and reasoning back to the cause. So I'm saying that all of these things point back to our suspect, God. Now, and this God, by the way, is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, all those attributes I just mentioned. Now, if you want to go much further in this, you can. The book Stealing from God is back there. It goes through this in this order. If you just want the debate PowerPoint, you can get that. And I want to point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the books will go to feed needy children, mine, okay? Just so you know. And here's my oldest little child who's now 30 years old. His name is Zach Turek. He's a captain in the Air Force. There he is right there. I tried to show that all of these effects have a cause, and I think the cause is God. I did not see, other than speculations from Michael, saying, well, it could be this, it could be that. He didn't really give a positive case for a world without God. He didn't give a positive case for how, in the absence of God, any of these things could come into existence. In fact, I think that atheists have to have extraordinary faith, because they have to have the faith that there's creation without a creator, design without a designer, laws without a lawgiver, programs without a programmer, freedom without free will because we're just molecules in motion, order without an orderer, morality from molecules, and rationality from randomness. I think the evidence shows that there has to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things and whose every attribute is infinite. I couldn't go through all the arguments today for that, but I think that's the case. Now, during the cross-examination, we brought up Jesus. And I think you could turn the science in crimes to sacrifice as well. Because if this being does exist, he's a moral being, and he finds that the creatures he loves are in trouble, at some point, he's going to come rescue them. September 29th, 2006, Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. He's got two other Navy SEALs flanking him. They're on a roof. Mansour is in front of a doorway to that roof. They've taken RPG fire, AK-47 fire, but they don't presently know where the enemy is, so they're waiting for the next attack. Suddenly, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest and falls to his feet. He has a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two Navy SEAL colleagues in the prone position next to him will surely die. So Mansour yells, "Grenade!" And then he jumps chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, he dies. His two Navy SEAL colleagues receive minor injuries, but they're fine. One of the survivors said, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush called Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House and gave Mansour's parents his Medal of Honor posthumously. Since then, Mansour's high school has named their stadium after him. The Golden Trident, the SEAL Golden Trident, is at the 50-yard line. And the United States Navy has named a ship, the USS Michael Mansour. He literally gave his life for his friends. There's no greater love than to give your life for your friends. Michael Mansour did it. He sacrificed himself when he easily could have saved himself. He died for his friends. The question is, has anybody or would anybody die for you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. The same being that created and sustains the universe, came, added humanity over his deity, came to earth and lived a perfect life in your place, and by trusting in him, you can not only be forgiven, you can be given his righteousness. And he proved it by rising from the dead. You say, "Frank, how do you know that?" Well, I don't have time in the next minute to go through all the evidence, but let me just say this. And that is, Christians do not believe that Christianity is true, that Jesus rose from the dead, because a series of documents we put under one binding called the Bible says it's true. Christianity is true because an event occurred. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible had never been written. Because the book did not give us Christianity, the resurrection gave us the book. There wouldn't even be a New Testament if it wasn't for the resurrection. What are Jews inventing a resurrected Jesus for? To get themselves beaten, tortured, and killed? Every writer of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, is a Jew. They already think they're God's chosen people. Why are they inventing a resurrected Jesus? They're not. The reason that we know it's true is because there's evidence it's true. 1,985 years ago, he walked out of a tomb and proved to everybody that he truly was the Savior. He jumped on the grenade for us. The question is, have you accepted that? Will you accept that? It's free. Why wouldn't you? That's why we're here.